The morning had started like any other for the FBI director. He woke up early, the soft light of dawn just creeping through the curtains. He had a full schedule ahead, briefings, reports, and meetings with his team. Despite the weight of the job, he always tried to take a few quiet moments for himself in the morning. Today was no different. Over a cup of coffee, he read through some reports noting updates on ongoing investigations. The news was filled with stories that ranged from petty theft to high-profile criminal cases. He sipped his coffee, letting his mind wander for a moment. Today, he thought, I might have a little time to run personal errands. He finished his coffee, dressed in a casual suit, and left his home. The drive through the quiet streets of the city was calming. There were only a few cars on the road, the morning sun reflecting off the windows of tall buildings. The director was used to driving under constant awareness, always alert, always conscious of his surroundings. But this morning he felt unusually relaxed. Maybe it was the light traffic, or maybe it was the brief break from the constant pressure of his job. As he drove down a familiar street, he noticed a car slowly following behind him. At first, he didn't think much of it. It wasn't unusual to see police cars patrolling the area, and he had been pulled over before on rare occasions, mostly routine stops. But then he saw the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. A chill ran down his spine, though he remained composed. He activated his turn signal and slowly pulled over to the side of the road. A young officer stepped out of the patrol car, moving quickly toward him. Something about the officer's demeanor felt different. Tense, almost nervous, with a strict intensity that was unusual for a routine traffic stop. The director rolled down his window, offering a polite greeting. "Good morning, officer," he said calmly. The officer didn't return the greeting. Instead, he barked instructions asking for the director's license, registration, and proof of insurance. The director reached carefully for his wallet, hands visible on the steering wheel at all times. He knew the officer's behavior didn't match the usual protocol for a traffic stop. There was a sharpness in the officer's voice that suggested he was on high alert. He handed over the documents slowly, making sure each movement was deliberate and non-threatening. "Here you go," he said evenly, his eyes steady on the officer. The officer took the documents, but his expression didn't change. He studied them closely, squinting as if he didn't quite believe what he was seeing. Then, without warning, he demanded the director to step out of the car. The director paused, considering his response carefully. He knew compliance was the safest option, but the sudden escalation was alarming. He opened the door slowly, stepping out with his hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. The officer's hand was on his weapon now, his stance rigid. The director froze for a moment, assessing the situation. This was a moment that could easily turn dangerous if not handled correctly. He spoke calmly, his voice steady, trying to de-escalate. "Officer, let's take it easy. I'm cooperating fully. There's no need for tension here." The officer, however, didn't lower his weapon. Instead, he repeated his orders more insistently this time, pointing the gun directly at the director. By now, a few pedestrians had started noticing the scene. Some slowed their cars to watch, while others took out their phones, filming from a distance. The director remained still, hands visible, following the officer's instructions as carefully as possible. Inside him, his mind was racing. He had trained for dangerous situations like this, but the reality of being held at gunpoint, while being a high-ranking law enforcement official himself, was surreal. He needed to remain calm, but every instinct told him to find a way to de-escalate the tension. The officer seemed tense, his eyes darting between the director and the car. He didn't recognize the man standing in front of him. Unaware of his identity, the director noticed the officer's confusion and realized that this misunderstanding could escalate quickly. He kept his movements deliberate and slow, speaking softly, trying to humanize himself. "I understand you're doing your job," he said. "Please just check my ID carefully. You'll see who I am." Minutes stretched on like hours. The officer's grip on his weapon didn't waver. He demanded that the director place his hands on the hood of the car, and the director complied. The cool metal under his palms was grounding, but the tension in the air was thick, almost tangible. He felt the eyes of passers-by and other drivers on him, watching as the situation unfolded. No one approached, and he didn't want anyone to. It was already dangerous enough. While this was happening, the director's personal security team had been alerted. They were trained to respond quickly, but they also knew the importance of not making sudden moves that could worsen the situation. They drove rapidly toward the scene, communicating with dispatch to confirm the details. Every second mattered, and the director was painfully aware of that. He continued to follow the officer's instructions, trying to keep his breathing steady and his voice calm. The officer finally glanced at the identification again, and there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He muttered something into his radio, and for a moment it seemed as if help might arrive soon. The director continued to speak in a calm tone, reinforcing that he was not a threat. "Everything is fine, officer. You'll see I'm cooperating. Let's get this resolved safely." His voice had a steady authority, not arrogant but calm and confident. It was a tone that could diffuse tension if the other person allowed it. As the director remained at gunpoint, more drivers slowed down, some stepping out of their cars cautiously, filming the scene. The officer didn't seem to notice the growing crowd, fully absorbed in the situation in front of him. The director, despite the fear and tension, maintained composure. He remembered countless training exercises where the stakes were life and death. This was real, and he could not afford a single misstep. Finally, backup arrived. Other officers and members of the director's security team approached cautiously. They quickly communicated with the young officer, confirming the director's identity. The tension in the air began to shift slightly as the realization set in. The officer was holding a high-ranking federal official at gunpoint, completely unaware of who he was dealing with. The situation, once tense and potentially dangerous, started moving toward resolution. Even as the situation began to resolve, the director remained professional.
He did not scold or show anger toward the officer.
Instead, he maintained a calm demeanor, understanding that this was a human error, fueled by confusion and overzealousness. The pedestrians slowly dispersed, some still filming, but the immediate danger had lessened. It was a surreal moment for everyone involved. An FBI director, trained in law enforcement and high-risk situations, had been placed in a position where he had to rely entirely on his calm and measured approach to survive. Inside the director's mind, he reflected on the fragility of such encounters. One small miscommunication, one wrong move could have turned the situation catastrophic. But the human element, his own ability to remain calm, the officer's willingness to follow instructions, and the backup arriving in time, had prevented tragedy. It was a powerful reminder that, no matter the authority or training, everyone is vulnerable in these moments, and professionalism and composure can make the difference between danger and safety. Once the director was safely escorted from the scene, he took a moment to collect himself. The adrenaline was still high, but he remained composed, knowing that how he reacted next would be important for both his own safety and for the accountability of the law enforcement officer involved. The first part of this story set the stage for the tension, the human drama, and the lessons about patience, awareness, and control in life or death situations. By the time the director returned to his vehicle under the watchful eye of his security team, he could reflect on the irony of the situation. Here he was, someone responsible for overseeing federal law enforcement activities, momentarily powerless because of a simple misrecognition. Yet the experience also reminded him of the importance of empathy, training, and clear communication. Even in tense moments, human behavior, when managed wisely, could prevent disaster. The day that had started so normally had taken a dramatic and unexpected turn, leaving a lasting impression not just on the director, but on the officer, the witnesses, and anyone who would later hear the story. For the director, it was a lesson in humility and patience. For the young officer, it was a lesson in awareness and responsibility. And for the public, it was a rare glimpse into how quickly everyday situations can escalate, when caution, communication, and understanding are not fully applied. The moment the director was escorted from the patrol car, the street remained tense. Pedestrians and drivers who had been watching in disbelief slowly began whispering among themselves. Some shook their heads, unable to comprehend how a simple traffic stop could spiral into a situation like this. Others were silently grateful that no shots had been fired. Though the image of the young officer pointing a gun at a high-ranking federal official lingered vividly in everyone's minds. The officer, still holding his weapon, now stood frozen, confusion and fear mingling across his face. His hands trembled slightly. and his eyes darted toward the approaching backup officers and the director's security detail. The reality of the situation hit him all at once. He had been trained for high-pressure moments, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this. Realizing that the person he had confronted was someone of immense authority, someone whose safety was paramount not just to the public, but to the very functioning of law enforcement at the federal level, dispatch crackled in his earpiece, calling for immediate identification verification. The officer raised his hand, gesturing for the backup to take over, trying to explain, but his voice was shaky. Meanwhile, the director, though shaken, maintained a calm and steady posture, watching the interaction carefully. His security team had surrounded him, ensuring there was a buffer between him and the officer, but he remained in the moment, observing, analyzing, and preparing for anything. One of the backup officers approached the young officer cautiously.
"Sir, we need you to lower your weapon and step back," the officer said firmly but without aggression.
The young officer's eyes filled with a mix of shame and disbelief. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he obeyed. The weight of the moment pressed on everyone. What had started as a routine stop could easily have ended tragically. As the situation stabilized, the director's security team finally took him aside, moving him to a safe position behind a nearby vehicle. He was visibly breathing a little faster, though he made no outward display of fear or panic. Inside, he was acutely aware of the fragility of human life and the consequences of split-second decisions. Even as someone trained to handle dangerous situations, the sense of vulnerability was undeniable. The young officer was now under close supervision. His partner, who had not yet intervened, appeared beside him, looking equally concerned and confused. Both officers were aware that the unfolding situation would lead to serious consequences. The initial tension began to give way to a mix of anxiety, guilt, and the dawning realization that their actions were under immediate scrutiny. Dispatch confirmed the director's identity, verifying through multiple channels that the man held at gunpoint was indeed the head of the FBI. The officer who had pulled him over visibly stiffened. He now understood the magnitude of the situation. His training had emphasized protocol, procedure, and caution, but the reality of confronting someone so influential, without knowing who he truly was, had created a dangerous mix of fear and misjudgment. Witnesses who had filmed the event began sharing their footage with law enforcement. Their videos captured every tense moment: the initial stop, the exchange of documents, the sudden escalation, and the moment the gun was drawn. These recordings would later prove essential, not just for accountability, but for understanding the sequence of events that had led to such a high-stakes confrontation. The presence of bystanders, once a potential complication, now became an important part of the resolution. The director, standing behind the safety of his security team, reflected on the incident. He knew that remaining calm had been critical. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and the outcome could have been disastrous. He had trained for years to manage life-threatening situations, but this scenario reminded him that even the most experienced professionals were still human. Stress, fear, and uncertainty could affect anyone, even those tasked with protecting the public. Law enforcement supervisors arrived on the scene to take control. They assessed the situation quickly, separating the officers involved and beginning preliminary questioning. The young officer, now weapon-free, appeared visibly shaken, his usual confidence replaced by a combination of fear, embarrassment, and regret. He knew that mistakes had been made, and the reality of those mistakes weighed heavily on him. The director, despite the danger he had just faced, did not show anger or scorn. Instead, he maintained a professional composure, understanding that this was a human error. He spoke calmly to the supervising officers, recounting the incident clearly and concisely. His demeanor was steady, even as his mind processed the risk he had just experienced. This calmness helped to keep the situation from escalating further, and it allowed those around him to focus on resolution rather than conflict. Meanwhile, conversations between witnesses, bystanders, and law enforcement began to emerge. People were curious, concerned, and sometimes shocked at what had happened. Many noted how strange it was to see someone of such authority placed in a vulnerable position. The young officer's actions, once meant to assert control, now served as a stark reminder of how quickly misunderstandings could turn dangerous. The officer's partner explained that they had initially thought the vehicle belonged to someone else, Miscommunication between dispatch and the officers had contributed to the confusion. The patrol had been on high alert for a nearby incident, which added tension and urgency to their response. This combination of factors, a mistaken vehicle, heightened alertness, and fear, had led to the dangerous escalation. As the director waited behind the safety of the vehicles, he noticed the subtle reactions of the young officer. Every now and then he would glance at him, shame evident in his eyes. It was a mix of fear, confusion, and the dawning realization that his judgment had failed in a critical moment. The director, trained to read human behavior, recognized that the officer was not malicious. He had simply acted out of fear and protocol. But without the situational awareness that could have prevented the escalation, the presence of the director's security team continued to provide a buffer, ensuring that the officer did not feel threatened unnecessarily, while also keeping the director safe. Communication between the team, the backup officers, and dispatch became crucial. Every detail mattered, from the verification of identity to the precise positioning of individuals at the scene. The director remained observant, his mind cataloging every movement, every expression, knowing that understanding human behavior was as critical as staying safe. Minutes passed slowly, each one feeling longer than the last. The tension in the air was thick, but it gradually shifted as the officers realized the severity of their mistake. The young officer's body language softened, and he finally lowered his gaze, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. It was a turning point, the shift from confrontation to reflection. The director, in his calm yet authoritative way, addressed the supervising officers. He explained the sequence of events with clarity, emphasizing the importance of verifying identities and understanding human reactions under stress. His tone was firm but composed, reflecting both his authority and his understanding of human error. It was clear that accountability would follow, but it was also clear that lessons could be learned without unnecessary hostility. Nearby pedestrians, having witnessed the event, slowly began moving along. Some exchanged whispers, recounting what they had seen. They could sense the seriousness of the situation, but also the professionalism that had prevented a tragedy. The director's calm presence, the backup response, and the resolution of immediate danger all contributed to a collective sigh of relief in the surrounding area. The young officer was eventually escorted to a safer area for questioning. Supervisors made it clear that there would be consequences, but the emphasis was also on understanding the factors that led to the escalation. Reports would be filed, and the incident would be examined in detail to prevent future occurrences. The director observed this process quietly, noting the balance between discipline and learning. He understood that mistakes could happen, but how institutions responded to them defined professionalism and accountability. Throughout the entire incident, the director maintained a remarkable level of composure. Inside, he was aware of the adrenaline and the near danger, but externally he projected calm and measured authority. This ability to remain grounded under pressure had likely prevented the situation from becoming far worse. It was a powerful reminder of the importance of emotional control, situational awareness, and human empathy, even in moments of extreme stress. Once the immediate tension had passed, the director's team began debriefing him. They discussed the events, analyzed the responses, and planned for the next steps. This reflection was critical. Even though the immediate danger was over, the lessons from the incident were far from complete. Understanding human behavior, improving communication, and ensuring procedural clarity would become the focus in the hours and days to come. The young officer, sitting quietly under supervision, was left to contemplate the gravity of what had occurred. Fear, embarrassment, and regret mixed together in his mind. He knew that his actions would be scrutinized, and he would have to account for the misjudgment that had nearly turned deadly. The incident would leave a lasting mark on him, a stark lesson in the importance of awareness, verification, and restraint in positions of authority. For the director, the day was a reminder of the unpredictable nature of life. Even someone in a position of immense power and responsibility could find themselves vulnerable. What mattered most was not the authority or the rank, but the ability to remain calm, to assess the situation, and to act with careful judgment. It was a human lesson, one that transcended titles and uniforms, a reminder that life could change in a single moment, and how one responded could define the outcome. By the time the streets returned to normal and the bystanders dispersed, the story of the day had already begun to take shape in the minds of those who witnessed it. It was a tale of fear, tension, and quick thinking. It was also a story about humanity, about mistakes, accountability, and the ability to maintain composure under pressure. The director, now safe and surrounded by his team, understood that the real work was only beginning. Not the work of fighting crime, but the work of ensuring that such misunderstandings could be prevented in the future through better training, communication, and awareness. The day that had started with errands and routine plans had turned into a high-stakes lesson in human behavior, professionalism, and the delicate balance of authority. Every participant, the director, the young officer, the bystanders, and the responding officers, had been touched by the experience. The incident was a stark reminder that even routine moments could become extraordinary, and that how people responded in those moments defined not just their own safety, but the safety of everyone around them. The scene had quieted down, but the energy in the air was far from normal. The director, though safe behind the protection of his security team, remained alert. He watched carefully as supervisors, backup officers, and his own team coordinated to ensure that the situation was fully under control. Every movement, every glance was measured and deliberate. Despite the adrenaline still coursing through him, he focused on observation, analyzing not just the immediate events but the human dynamics at play. The young officer who had initially drawn his weapon was now seated on the curb, hands resting nervously on his knees. His partner remained nearby, occasionally whispering instructions and reassurances. The officer's face was pale, and his eyes kept flicking toward the director. He realized with a sinking feeling the gravity of his mistake. Fear, guilt, and disbelief mingled within him. He had acted according to training, yet the outcome had nearly turned catastrophic. He had held a top federal official at gunpoint without knowing it. The weight of that realization pressed heavily on him. Dispatch continued to verify the director's identity, calling in multiple sources to ensure accuracy. Meanwhile, the director's own team worked quickly to maintain the perimeter and manage the scene. They politely asked bystanders to step back, ensuring that no one inadvertently interfered. The crowd had grown slightly curious and anxious, and the cameras on smartphones captured every tense moment. The director understood the importance of remaining composed in front of witnesses. Any sign of panic or anger could exacerbate the situation, and he was keenly aware of that. Finally, confirmation came in. The director's identity was verified beyond any doubt. The young officer's eyes widened as the information was relayed to him. He had been holding the head of the FBI at gunpoint, completely unaware. His partner placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to calm him, though the shock lingered visibly. The young officer's body stiffened, a mixture of relief and mortification coursing through him. He had survived a tense encounter, but the humiliation and potential consequences weighed heavily. The director, noticing the officer's reaction, maintained a calm and measured posture. He did not show anger or superiority. Instead, he understood the human error involved. Fear can cloud judgment, and even trained individuals can make mistakes under pressure. Speaking to the supervising officers, he explained the sequence of events clearly and calmly, outlining the officer's actions without exaggeration. His tone was factual but empathetic, acknowledging the seriousness of the mistake while avoiding unnecessary confrontation. Supervisors immediately began separating those involved for further questioning. The young officer was escorted to a nearby vehicle to provide his statement, while other officers secured the area. The director's security team ensured that he remained protected, but also allowed the process to unfold naturally. There was no need to escalate further. The situation had already drawn significant attention, and maintaining professionalism was crucial. Witnesses who had filmed the incident were now approached by law enforcement. Officers politely asked for copies of their videos, explaining that the recordings would be critical for the investigation. Many were hesitant, but most agreed, recognizing the importance of accurate documentation. The footage captured every detail: the initial traffic stop, the exchange of documents, the moment the weapon was drawn, and the tense standoff that followed. These recordings would later provide an unambiguous account of what had occurred. The young officer, still visibly shaken, finally spoke. His voice trembled slightly as he explained his perception of events. "I thought he was someone else," he admitted. "There was a vehicle reported in the area, and I was on high alert. I didn't recognize him. I didn't know." His words were careful, cautious, a mixture of truth and fear. The director listened quietly, his expression unreadable. He understood that mistakes like these often arose from a combination of fear, protocol, and human error. Supervisors nodded, acknowledging the officer's explanation, but emphasizing the severity of the incident. Procedures had not been properly followed, and the officer would face consequences. At the same time, there was an understanding that the officer had acted under stress and without malicious intent. The balance between accountability and understanding was delicate, and the director's calm presence helped to set the tone for a professional and measured response. The director's mind, however, was not focused solely on the immediate events. He was already thinking ahead. Misunderstandings like this could easily erode trust between different branches of law enforcement. It was essential to handle the situation carefully, ensuring that lessons were learned and that no further escalation would occur. Communication, verification procedures, and training would all need to be addressed. This was not just about one officer's mistake. It was about improving the system as a whole. Meanwhile, the bystanders, still observing from a distance, whispered among themselves. Some were visibly relieved that the situation had not turned deadly. Others expressed concern for the young officer, noting how fear can influence behavior. A few commented on the professionalism of the director, remarking on his calm demeanor despite the extreme danger he had faced. The incident had become more than a traffic stop. It was now a lesson in human behavior, authority, and the importance of measured responses in tense situations. The young officer was now being taken for further processing. Supervisors explained the next steps clearly, emphasizing both accountability and support. The officer would be questioned thoroughly, and internal reviews would follow. Meanwhile, the director remained behind the safety of his security team, observing silently. He had no need to intervene further. The professional handling of the scene by his team and law enforcement was sufficient. His role now was reflection and ensuring that the situation was fully resolved without incident. Inside the director, emotions were complex. There was relief, of course, but also a sense of vulnerability. Even someone in his position, with years of experience in law enforcement and crisis management, could find themselves in a position of extreme risk. He understood that authority and rank did not make one immune to danger. What mattered most was the ability to stay calm, think clearly, and act with precision. His training had prepared him for such moments, but the human element, the fear, the uncertainty, the mistakes was always unpredictable. He observed the young officer one last time before the man was taken away. There was a visible mix of remorse and anxiety on the officer's face. The director did not judge him harshly. Instead, he recognized that this moment could become a turning point for the officer, for the system, and for those who witnessed the event. Mistakes were inevitable, but how they were addressed, corrected, and learned from could define the professionalism of an entire institution. The director's team began coordinating next steps. Statements were being documented, evidence was being collected, and procedures for reporting and accountability were being followed meticulously. Every detail mattered. The professionalism displayed during the follow-up would ensure that the situation was fully understood and that mistakes would be prevented in the future. The director, always observant, made mental notes of what had transpired, aware that every action, every decision, would be scrutinized and remembered. The crowd of bystanders had dispersed by now, leaving only the necessary personnel. The city street, once filled with tension, slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Traffic moved cautiously, with some drivers still glancing toward the scene, trying to comprehend what had happened. The incident had left a mark, not just on those directly involved, but on the witnesses and the community. It was a rare glimpse into how quickly ordinary moments could escalate into life-threatening situations and how human judgment and professionalism could prevent disaster. The director finally allowed himself a moment of reflection. His heart rate was returning to normal, though the adrenaline was still present. He understood that this experience would stay with him, not just as an event, but as a reminder of the unpredictability of life, the importance of composure, and the value of human empathy. Even in positions of great authority, one could never take safety or calm for granted. The young officer, meanwhile, was escorted to a secure location for further questioning. He understood that his actions would have consequences, and the weight of responsibility was heavy on his shoulders. Internal investigations would follow, and his career, reputation, and personal reflection would all be shaped by this incident. Yet, within the gravity of the moment, there was also an opportunity for learning, for understanding human error, and for improving future responses. As the director left the scene with his team, he spoke quietly to his security detail, emphasizing the importance of reviewing procedures and ensuring that all personnel involved understood the events clearly. The day had been a stark reminder of the thin line between routine and crisis, and the critical role of measured behavior under pressure. He knew that the lessons from this incident would ripple outward, affecting policy, training, and awareness for years to come. Though the immediate danger had passed, the story of the day was far from over. Reports would be filed, investigations would unfold, and lessons would be drawn. The young officer would face accountability, and the system would examine how miscommunication and heightened alertness could lead to near-tragic situations. But at the center of it all was a human story, a story of fear, misunderstanding, professionalism, and the power of remaining calm in the face of extreme stress. The director, reflecting quietly as he returned to his routine, understood the full impact of what had occurred. It was a reminder that no matter how experienced, how powerful, or how trained one might be, life can present moments of vulnerability. What mattered most was how people responded in those moments, with calm, clarity, and humanity. It was not a story about authority or rank alone, it was a story about people, human error, and the choices that define outcomes when tensions run high. By the time he returned to his office, the events of the day had already begun to circulate in whispers, calls, and preliminary reports. The director, composed and focused, began planning the next steps, ensuring that proper investigations were conducted, that lessons were learned, and that procedures were improved. What had started as a routine day had become a defining moment, a reminder of the delicate balance between authority, responsibility, and human error. The city had mostly returned to its usual rhythm, but the incident lingered in the minds of those involved. For the FBI director, the morning's events had left a strong impression. Sitting in his office, he reflected on how quickly life could change. One moment he had been running a simple errand. The next he was held at gunpoint by an officer who had no idea who he was. The reality of the situation was still settling in. Immediately after the incident, the young officer was placed under formal supervision. Law enforcement supervisors arrived swiftly, taking control of the situation with measured professionalism. They ensured that the officer was calm, secured, and fully aware of the seriousness of his actions. At the same time, the director's security team was briefing him on the next steps. It was clear that there would be an official investigation, internal reviews, and ultimately consequences for the officer. The investigation began quickly. Officers documented every detail of the incident, collecting statements from witnesses, reviewing the video footage captured by bystanders, and gathering the patrol car's records. The young officer was questioned thoroughly, recounting his perception of the events and the decisions that had led him to draw his weapon. He spoke hesitantly, aware that any misstep in his explanation could further complicate matters. He admitted that the situation had escalated because of heightened alertness and a mistaken assumption about the vehicle's occupant. His voice quivered at times, betraying the stress he had been under. Supervisors listened carefully, noting the importance of understanding human behavior in high-stress situations. They were firm in emphasizing that while mistakes happen, the gravity of this one required accountability. Meanwhile, the director met with senior officials from his office and local law enforcement. They discussed the sequence of events, analyzing how such a misunderstanding could occur and how to prevent similar incidents in the future. The conversation was serious but professional, focused on lessons rather than blame. The director stressed the need for clear communication, proper verification of identities, and ongoing training for all officers to handle high-pressure situations without unnecessary escalation. The young officers' department began internal reviews. Supervisors examined whether protocol had been followed correctly and whether additional training or policy changes were needed. They also looked at the officer's past record, evaluating whether there had been prior incidents that could have predicted this outcome. The investigation was thorough, leaving no detail unexamined. The officer, aware of the scrutiny, sat quietly during questioning, absorbing the weight of his actions and the potential consequences. Public interest in the incident grew quickly. Local news outlets had picked up reports from bystanders and initial statements from law enforcement. The story was unusual. An FBI director held at gunpoint by a city officer was not a common headline. Reporters reached out to both local police and the FBI for comment, and official statements were carefully crafted to convey the facts without exaggeration. The director himself did not comment publicly at this stage, allowing the investigation to unfold without interference. Within the department, conversations turned to accountability. The officer's colleagues discussed how the situation could have been handled differently, noting the role of fear and human error in escalating tense encounters. There was recognition that even trained officers can make mistakes under pressure, but also agreement that training, supervision, and adherence to protocol were critical. This incident became a case study in the importance of balancing caution with situational awareness. The young officer was formally placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. This step was procedural but necessary. Supervisors explained the process clearly, emphasizing that the officer's career was not necessarily over, but that accountability and reflection were essential. The officer accepted the decision quietly, still processing the embarrassment and fear that came from realizing the magnitude of his mistake. For the director, the events of that morning highlighted the need for systemic reflection. He discussed with his senior team the possibility of improving coordination between federal and local law enforcement, especially in high-stakes environments. Misidentification and fear could lead to unnecessary danger, and preventive measures were critical. The conversation emphasized that while human error was unavoidable, preparation and awareness could significantly reduce risk. Interviews with witnesses and bystanders added context to the investigation. Their videos and statements provided an unbiased view of the events, showing both the escalation and the steps taken to de-escalate. These accounts were invaluable in understanding what had happened and in ensuring that the officer's actions were evaluated fairly and accurately. The human element, fear, misunderstanding, and reaction under stress became a central focus. The officer's training records were reviewed as part of the investigation. Supervisors examined whether he had received sufficient preparation for high-pressure encounters and whether there were gaps in protocol understanding. It became clear that additional training could have helped prevent the escalation, highlighting the need for continuous education and awareness in law enforcement roles. The officer, reflecting on this, understood that mistakes often serve as harsh but necessary lessons. Meanwhile, the director began sharing his insights with his team, emphasizing professionalism, calmness, and the human aspect of law enforcement. He described how maintaining composure under extreme stress was essential, and how empathy and communication could prevent potentially dangerous situations. His perspective, grounded in experience and authority, helped shape the way the department approached the ongoing investigation. Local authorities also engaged in discussions about policy implications. How should officers verify identities during traffic stops? What additional measures could be implemented to prevent misunderstandings? These questions prompted a review of standard procedures and prompted discussions about training enhancements, communication protocols, and the importance of awareness in everyday interactions between law enforcement and the public. For the young officer, the reality of his actions settled in more deeply as he reviewed statements, videos, and recollections of the event. He realized that fear and miscommunication had driven his decisions, and that his response, while understandable in context, was still a mistake with serious consequences. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but there was also a clear opportunity for growth and reflection. He understood that acknowledging mistakes and learning from them was critical for both personal and professional development. The director, though safe, reflected on the fragility of control in high-pressure moments. Even with authority, experience, and training, vulnerability existed. He recognized that fear and human error could influence anyone, regardless of rank. His calm response had prevented escalation, but the incident underscored the importance of awareness, communication, and human empathy in preventing tragedy. As the investigation progressed, the officers' department began planning remedial actions. Training programs were reviewed, and discussions about improving protocols intensified. Supervisors emphasized that mistakes, while serious, were also opportunities to enhance understanding and preparedness. The focus shifted from blame to systemic improvement, ensuring that lessons would be learned and that similar incidents could be prevented in the future. The director met briefly with the officer once the formal interviews concluded. It was a controlled professional meeting. He did not express anger or condescension, but instead emphasized understanding and learning. "We all make mistakes," he said calmly. "What matters is how we respond, how we learn, and how we ensure it doesn't happen again. Your actions today had consequences, but this is also an opportunity to grow." The officer listened intently, absorbing the weight of the director's words. The department released a formal statement to the public, highlighting the facts without sensationalism. The incident was described accurately, with emphasis on accountability, procedural review, and the steps being taken to prevent future occurrences. The director's role was acknowledged, but the focus remained on lessons learned and professional handling of the situation. The communication was clear, responsible, and transparent, helping maintain public trust. In the days that followed, internal discussions continued. Supervisors held meetings with officers to review the events, analyzing decision-making, communication, and situational awareness. The young officer participated fully, offering insight into his thought process and responding to feedback. The experience became a learning tool, a reminder of the human factors that can influence even the most trained professionals. The director, though returning to routine duties, kept the incident in mind. It was a powerful reminder of the unpredictability of life and the importance of composure, empathy, and clarity. He spoke with his team about the importance of human behavior in law enforcement, noting that understanding fear, stress, and reaction was as important as technical skill. The lessons from the morning would influence training, policy, and the approach to similar situations for years to come. For the young officer, the consequences were becoming more tangible. Administrative leave provided time for reflection, and ongoing supervision ensured accountability. He met with mentors and trainers to discuss how the situation could have been handled differently. The lessons were clear: verify identities carefully, remain calm under stress, and understand the human element in every interaction. The experience, though difficult, offered a chance for meaningful growth. The director's leadership during the incident became a case study within the department. His calm, measured response under extreme pressure was cited as an example of professionalism and effective crisis management. Supervisors highlighted his ability to remain composed, communicate clearly, and de-escalate tension without resorting to confrontation. The incident, though tense and dangerous, became a teaching moment for both local and federal law enforcement agencies. Ultimately, the events of that morning left lasting impressions on everyone involved. The officer learned the hard lessons of accountability, awareness, and reflection. The director gained further insight into the unpredictability of human behavior and the importance of calm leadership. The department improved training and protocols to prevent similar incidents, reinforcing the idea that mistakes, while serious, could be transformed into opportunities for learning and growth. By the end of this part of the story, the city had returned to normal, but the lessons of that tense morning lingered. Everyone involved understood that the balance between authority, responsibility, and human error was delicate. How people responded to pressure, fear, and uncertainty could determine the difference between disaster and safety. And through it all, the importance of empathy, composure, and measured action remained clear, a reminder that human behavior, when guided wisely, could prevent tragedy and inspire growth. Days after the incident, the city seemed to return to its usual rhythm. Yet the story lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it, worked through it, or been part of it. For the FBI director, the events of that morning had become more than just a high-stakes encounter. They had become a powerful lesson in human behavior, patience, and the delicate balance between authority and vulnerability. He spent time with his team, discussing the incident in detail. Every action, every choice, and every reaction was examined, not with blame, but with a focus on understanding and learning. He emphasized that while protocol and training were crucial, the human element, the emotions, fears, and instincts, played an equally important role in shaping outcomes. Even the most experienced professionals could find themselves caught off guard, and how they responded could mean the difference between safety and tragedy. The young officer remained under administrative review, receiving guidance and support from his department. The experience had left a profound mark on him. He was filled with regret, but also a determination to grow from it. The officer spent hours reviewing the sequence of events, reflecting on how fear and assumptions had driven his actions. He met with trainers and mentors who helped him understand how to maintain composure in high-pressure situations, how to verify information carefully, and how to communicate effectively under stress. For the director, one of the most striking aspects of the incident was how quickly public perception could form. Based on fragments of information, witnesses had filmed the encounter, capturing moments that were tense and dramatic. Some people shared their recordings online, discussing what they had seen. The director understood the power of these images and videos, how they could shape opinions, and how important it was to provide context and clarity. He remained calm and composed, knowing that the truth and professionalism would ultimately be recognized. The investigation continued, meticulously reviewing every detail. Reports were filed, witness statements collected, and video footage analyzed. The young officer's actions were scrutinized, not just to assign accountability, but to understand why the situation had escalated and how future mistakes could be prevented. The director watched this process closely, appreciating the balance between discipline and learning. Mistakes, he knew, were inevitable, but they also offered opportunities for improvement if handled thoughtfully. During this period, the director also met with local law enforcement leaders. Together, they discussed ways to enhance coordination between federal and local officers, particularly during high-alert situations. Miscommunication, fear, and mistaken assumptions could escalate situations dangerously, and preventative measures were essential. The discussions were serious and detailed, focusing on practical solutions such as improved verification procedures, situational awareness training, and the importance of maintaining calm under pressure. The young officer, in particular, began to understand the impact of his actions on more than just himself. He realized how fragile trust could be between law enforcement and the public. One moment of misjudgment had the potential to endanger lives, damage reputations, and shake confidence in institutions. It was a heavy realization, but it became a turning point. He committed himself to rigorous training, seeking to ensure that he would never repeat the mistakes of that morning. For the director, reflection went beyond the immediate danger. He thought about leadership, responsibility, and the ways human behavior shapes outcomes. Even in positions of great authority, vulnerability is ever present. How one reacts in moments of fear, confusion, or uncertainty defines not only personal safety but the safety of others. Maintaining composure, clear thinking, and empathy became central themes in his reflections. The incident also prompted conversations about accountability and fairness. The officer had acted without malicious intent, but the consequences were serious. Supervisors emphasized that accountability was not just about punishment. It was about learning, correcting mistakes, and improving the system. The director agreed wholeheartedly. He understood that true leadership involves recognizing human error, fostering growth, and ensuring that lessons are applied system-wide. Community reactions were mixed but largely positive. Witnesses appreciated the calm handling of the situation by all parties involved. They recognized the professionalism of the director, who had remained composed even in the face of extreme danger. Many expressed relief that the incident had not turned violent, and some noted how human error could be mitigated through communication, training, and careful decision-making. The story quickly became a teaching example, not just for law enforcement, but for anyone interested in understanding human behavior under stress. The young officer, meanwhile, was involved in workshops and debriefings that focused on real-world scenarios. Trainers emphasized the importance of verifying facts, assessing situations carefully, and managing fear effectively. The officer began to internalize these lessons, understanding that mistakes, while costly, could become powerful motivators for improvement. He worked to rebuild confidence in his judgment and professionalism, knowing that this experience would define much of his future in law enforcement. For the director, One of the lasting impressions was the unpredictability of everyday life. A routine drive, a minor stop, had escalated into a life-threatening situation. Yet it also highlighted the power of calm, deliberate action. By maintaining composure, following reason, and understanding the human element, he had navigated danger successfully. It reinforced his belief that leadership is not about control alone. It is about influence, empathy, and the ability to guide outcomes positively, even in crisis. Discussions with his team continued for weeks. They analyzed the incident from every angle: the behavior of the young officer, the timing of responses, the reactions of bystanders, and the communication between various law enforcement units. Each analysis provided insight into human behavior, decision-making under stress, and the ways small errors can have significant consequences. The director encouraged his team to treat the incident as a case study, focusing on growth and improvement rather than blame. The officers' department implemented new procedures based on lessons learned. Emphasis was placed on identity verification, communication protocols, and scenario-based training. The goal was to prevent similar misunderstandings and ensure that officers were prepared to handle high-pressure encounters without escalating situations unnecessarily. The young officer, participating fully in these initiatives, became an example of how reflection and accountability could lead to meaningful change. For the director, the experience reinforced the importance of public trust. Law enforcement relies not only on authority, but also on perception, communication, and human judgment. A single incident, if mishandled, can erode trust and confidence. By responding with calmness, empathy, and professionalism, he had demonstrated that even in tense, high-risk moments, leadership could inspire confidence and prevent tragedy. As time passed, the city slowly moved on from the incident. Media coverage settled, public attention shifted, and routines returned. Yet the lessons of that morning remained vivid for those involved. The director carried them forward into his work, using the experience to strengthen leadership practices, reinforce training, and emphasize the importance of human awareness in law enforcement. The young officer, now reflecting deeply on his journey, recognized the power of accountability. His mistake had been serious, but the response from supervisors, trainers, and the director had been both firm and fair. He understood that acknowledging errors, learning from them, and committing to improvement were essential steps in personal and professional growth. The experience, while difficult, had reshaped his approach to law enforcement and decision-making. The director also considered the broader implications for society. Incidents like this highlight the fragility of safety, the unpredictability of human interactions, and the need for empathy and careful judgment in every encounter. Fear, stress, and misunderstanding can escalate quickly, but thoughtful action, communication, and composure can prevent disaster. These lessons extended beyond law enforcement, applying to anyone navigating high-pressure situations in life. Reflecting on the incident, the director realized that leadership is as much about guiding behavior as it is about authority. It is about understanding the human mind, recognizing fear and stress, and responding in ways that reduce harm while reinforcing trust. His calm presence during the incident had not only protected his own life, but also helped prevent harm to others, including the young officer. It was a demonstration of the profound impact that measured, human-centered leadership can have. In time, the young officer returned to active duty, equipped with new training, a deeper understanding of human behavior, and the awareness that even small decisions could have significant consequences. He approached his work with renewed caution, professionalism, and empathy. The incident had changed him, instilling lessons that would guide him for the rest of his career. The director, meanwhile, continued his daily work, but the incident remained a reference point. He shared the experience selectively, using it to teach lessons about calmness under pressure, accountability, and human behavior. He emphasized that mistakes are not just failures, they are opportunities for growth, reflection, and improvement. The story became part of training discussions, case studies, and leadership examples, illustrating how professionalism and empathy can prevent tragedy even in extreme situations. For everyone involved, the incident was a turning point. The young officer learned humility and responsibility. Supervisors reinforced accountability and training. The director's leadership was highlighted as an example of calm professionalism, and the broader community was reminded that even routine moments could escalate unexpectedly. and that human behavior, when guided thoughtfully, can prevent disaster. In the end, the story of that morning became more than just an unusual event. It became a lesson in patience, human judgment, and the importance of measured responses. The director, the young officer, the supervisors, and even the witnesses all carried forward a shared understanding that fear and miscommunication can escalate quickly, but empathy, calmness, and professional behavior can protect lives and restore trust. The incident would remain a reference point for years to come. It was a reminder that authority does not remove vulnerability, that mistakes are part of being human, and that accountability and reflection are essential for growth. The director's calm actions, the officer's lessons learned, and the procedural improvements that followed all contributed to a stronger, more aware and more professional approach to law enforcement and leadership. And so, what had started as an ordinary day ended as a defining moment for everyone involved. A story of human error, professional composure, accountability, and the enduring power of measured, thoughtful action. It was a reminder that in life, the choices we make under pressure define not just outcomes but the people we become.